Why does document type matter when preparing documents for use outside the United States? Let's find out. Hi, I'm Chermaine Smith with Elite Notary signing in Duluth, Georgia. And as a commissioned notary and apostille facilitator, I have witnessed many times that people start searching for answers before they fully understand the document they're working with. And that's generally where confusion often begins because you can't identify the solution until you identify the situation. So far in this series, we've been discussing why notarized does not always mean internationally ready. And we've discussed why understanding a document comes before understanding the apostille. So today we're just going to take that conversation one step further. And we're going to ask the question, what type of document do you actually have? Now, usually at first glance, that may seem like a simple question, but oftentimes it's really not. It's one of the most important questions that you can ask about document processing. And when most people hear that question, they think, well, that's just a label. But technically, it's really not. The document type actually defines the conversation itself. And so when you think about it this way, if you imagine yourself walking into a library where every book looked exactly the same, there were no categories, there were no labels, there was no organization to the system. You found that maybe history books were being mixed with cookbooks or children's books were being mixed with medical textbooks. So everything that you were looking for, the information that you were in need of, you would find it quite frustrating, not because the books were wrong, but simply because there was no context. And that's usually why libraries use categories, right? And it's not to complicate things, but to simply create clarity. And so when you think about it, documents work pretty much the same way. The categories helps us understand what we're looking at before we start looking for answers. For example, a birth certificate is often categorized as a vital record. And then you might have a school transcript, and that's categorized as an educational record. If you received a power of attorney, that will be considered a personal document. And then an FBI background check is considered a federal document. Now, at first glance, they may all seem like just documents, right? So you're calling and you're like, I need help with this document. And you just feel like it's just a document, but technically they're not the same type of document and they come from different sources. So they serve different purposes. And so with that, they often begin different conversations. For an example, someone that was looking to have an FBI background check completed. Well, that conversation is different because it follows a federal pathway because it originates from a federal agency. And then with a birth certificate, that begins as a vital record. So that has a completely different conversation attached to it, as does a transcript, which originates from an educational institution. So these distinctions matters because the document category helps identify which pathway may apply. And some documents may involve notarization, some may involve apostille review, some may involve authentication or legalization. And then there are some situations that may involve more than one consideration altogether, meaning you may need a notarization and apostille and a legalization or something like that. So that's why identifying the document type is so important. because before anyone can determine what factors may apply, they first need to understand what type of document they're working with, because the category helps identify the pathway, and the pathway helps define the conversation. So notice what we're still not talking about here. We're still not talking about forms. We're not talking about submissions. And we're not talking about procedures. And quite honestly, that's actually intentional, because the goal is not to memorize a process. The goal is simply to understand the document, and understanding the document starts with identification. So if you're preparing documents for use outside the United States, it's important to take a moment and ask yourself, what type of document do I actually have? Because the document type doesn't just describe the document, it actually defines the conversation. So if you're preparing documents for international use and you're unsure what factors may apply to your situation, Elite Notary Signing does provide apostille and mobile notary support throughout Georgia, because we strongly believe that clarity starts with understanding what you're working with. I'm Chermaine Smith with Elite Notary Signing. Let's continue to grow together. If you found this video helpful, be sure to give me a thumbs up, share it with someone who may need it, subscribe to the channel, and save this video so you can come back to it later. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.